all, Dr. Lissy here. I just wanted to take a few minutes to walk you through the things I want you to think about when you're planning your read aloud. So when you're in the classroom every day, it's really easy to get into a habit of just picking up any book off the shelf and reading it. But you're going to get the most out of your read alouds if you take the time to plan them. And I literally use sticky notes. I pick a book ahead of time. I think about what I want to ask questions. At this point in my career, I know what I want to ask in advance, but I still mark pages when I want to make sure I don't forget something, and I write myself little notes to remind myself. And I teach my students that this is what I do, because when they're reading and they are monitoring their comprehension, they can use sticky notes to remind themselves about important events, to think about important concepts. So there's kind of two different things you can do. Well, there's a million different things, but two of the main things you can do during your read aloud is you can work on improving your students' vocabulary and you can work on their comprehension. And so sometimes when you read aloud, you do really a think aloud. So you think through and model what good readers do when they're reading a text. So you think about, where are my students going to be challenged when they read books like this? Where are my students going to struggle? And what strategies do I want to see them using when they're doing their own reading? So when you're choosing a read aloud, you need to be thinking about those tricky places so you can model what they should be doing. You can select vocabulary that you want to focus on. So when you're thinking about vocabulary, you can decide, do you want to have the pictures and the context clues help them understand the meaning of the words? Or do you want to model how you would use the pictures and the context clues to demonstrate what the word means? Or do you just want to tell them what that word means so that if they see it, they've been exposed to it and they've heard it before? So I'm not going to read you this whole book, but the book I've selected is Duck and Goose. And so with this book, there is a great opportunity for the students to do some predictions. And we know that good readers make predictions and good readers think about what could happen in the story, because that gets them ready to ensure that they understand what they're reading and they're monitoring their comprehension. So I've got my little sticky note here. What do you think is going to happen? And I tell my students, I wanted to remember to ask you what you think is going to happen. And in this case, I might even do a little bit of a think aloud. So I found this book at the library the other day and I thought it looked so cool. I really wanted to share it with you. And when I read it, I know you're going to love it too. It's about two friends, Duck and Goose. Now, when I look at the front cover, I notice something. Does anyone notice anything when they look at this cover? Do they look like they like each other? Or do they look a little fussy? I'm not sure. So I'm going to predict that they're kind of grumpy at each other because they have their backs turned, and look at how their bodies are. So one thing I like to do when I'm reading is I like to look at the illustrations, because sometimes it shows me how the characters might feel. So Duck and Goose. And so the other option would be that you would ask them and then guide them to come to that conclusion themselves. Duck and Goose, written and illustrated by Tad Hills. Oh my, what's that? Duck quacked. That's a silly question, Goose honked. It is a big egg, of course. Of course it's an egg. I know that, huffed Duck. What I mean is, where did it come from? So when you're reading your books aloud, make sure that you're using a lot of expression, you're reading with fluency and prosody, and you are modeling what good readers do. So this is a great book for a kindergarten or first grade classroom. You can read it in as little as a preschool classroom, but it's kind of got a lot of text. So if you're going to read it in a preschool classroom, I would actually break it up over a couple of days. So here they are. They're fighting over who gets the egg. And then here, I've written myself another note. So I'm going to read you this page and model what I would do. And this is a place I'm going to be building vocabulary. Hey, you should never put your dirty foot on an egg, Duck scolded. Don't you know anything about caring for eggs? Yes, I do, Goose cried. Stop yelling! Duck yelled, then whispered forcefully, don't you know that you and your screaming are likely disturbing the baby bird who's trying to take a snooze inside this egg? Huh, that's kind of a big word, disturbing. What do you think disturbing could mean? Let's see. Well, they're being loud and they're yelling at each other. So maybe it's kind of annoying or bothering them. Can you think of a time that someone was disturbing or bothering you? And then I'd let a couple of kids respond. If it was a word that I thought that some of my students would know, I would let them volunteer to answer. But you don't want kids to learn the wrong definition for words, especially if you're trying to highlight them in a read aloud. So you're better off to either model what the word means and you talk about how you use the context of the book to figure it out, or to just tell them the answer. Because you want them to be learning and building their vocabulary knowledge, and you don't want them to get confused with incorrect understandings. So here they are, they're fighting over the egg, fighting over whose it is. Now, when you guys do your read aloud, I want you to read every page. I want you to ask questions every few pages, but also keep an eye on how long it takes to read your book. So if you're in like a kindergarten or first grade classroom, at the beginning of a kindergarten year, they're going to be able to sit for 10, 15 minutes tops. At the beginning of first grade, it'll be 15, 20 minutes. And really, you don't want to read aloud to go much longer than that at any grade level, just because it takes up so much time. So make sure that you're practicing your timing and all of those things. The other thing I want to talk about is the illustrations in a book. So little kids sometimes have a difficult time understanding what is happening in the pictures, and they are very visually based. So in this picture on this side, kids often get confused about what's going on here. So what's happening is the duck and the goose are fighting over the egg. So they're all in a battle. But some kids might see this and think that there all of a sudden are a whole bunch of ducks and geese in the picture. So it's a good idea to think about where the tricky illustrations might be in your book and how to talk to them about that, and to check to make sure that they understand the illustrations as well. So when you're planning your read aloud, think about comprehension questions you might want to ask. Think about vocabulary questions you might want to ask. Think about the types of things that are going to trick up your students when you're doing your read aloud, and plan all of that in. Now, you don't want to stop on every page. You don't want to disrupt the flow of the story that much, but come up with 3 to 5 vocabulary words you want to highlight. Come up with 3 to 5 questions you want to ask throughout the book. You may just stop and ask one question at the beginning, one at the end, and one in the middle for comprehension. And that's okay too. But I want you to think carefully about where you want to ask questions and how you want to demonstrate how good readers read. So I can't wait to see your read alouds.